This is Heritage Words, a podcast about the words we've inherited from our ancestors and the meaning they bring to our lives. Heritage Words is produced by the HUC Jewish Language Project, which raises awareness about Jewish ancestral diversity through the lens of language. I'm your host, Sarah Bunin Benor. Our guest today is Benny Ginsberg-Margo. Benny is an undergraduate student of linguistics at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. He's interested in language documentation and revitalization, especially in First Nations communities. Benny is a WikiTongues language revitalization fellow working to make recipe videos in Ladino, Judeo-Spanish, with his channel, Mersi Muncho. Benny, welcome to Heritage Words.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you here with us today. So
Happy
let's
to be here.
start by talking about your ancestors. Where did they come from?
Yeah, I was always told that we're like mutts. My family is very mixed. We've been in America for a few generations, and I think it has a tendency to compound over time. Uh, each one of my grandparents is a very unique story of their family coming to America. On my dad's side, his father's family came from what is now Israel, what at that point was like Ottoman Palestine and British Palestine. Um, and they came to America in the 1910s and 20s. And they actually, when they came to America, that generation were speaking Hebrew at home. It was a mixed family. And we think because, part of the family had been in what was Tzfat for hundreds of years, and part of the family had come from Bulgaria and Romania, was speaking Ladino, that they just used Hebrew as the lingua franca, and so that's what they were speaking in the home way back 100 years ago.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
do you know where the family from Tzfat had come from before they ended up in Tzfat?
that is a serious debate. Before this podcast, I had called my parents and I was asking them about this, and my dad had said something that I just like never had heard even before, and I was like, huh. So we really just have no idea. This is fun.
Okay.
But we think probably from Spain or Portugal, and they came around the time of Maimonides is what one person said, and then someone said they came after the expulsion, and someone said that like they went through North Africa and whatever. But yeah.
But do you think they identified as Sephardic?
Yeah, so there's this thing called the Montefiore census where the British Jew Montefiore he did a census of the Jews that were living at that time in Israel. And he made a couple censuses across the 1800s. And one thing that they record is the Kollel, the like what organization they're part of. And at that time, the biggest Sephardi organization in the what was then Ottoman Palestine was the Maghrebi. So they were part of the Maghrebi Kollel. I don't know if that meant that they were Maghrebi, but um, definitely they have very I should say Hebrew names, like specifically Hebrew names. So they were on the forefront of the Zionist movement, generally with the religious Zionist movement, and so I think there's a lot of strong like Hebrew culture identity there.
Yeah, and that's really unusual to have American Jews who came from Palestine in the 1910s.
Yeah,
That's very unusual.
yeah. At that time, there was a riots and a lot of violence that was happening in response to the growing nationalisms, and so it was a good time to get out when they could. But that side of the family, except for my direct ancestor, all immigrated back once these independence was achieved. So I have family descended from the family that came to America, and then we're like, oh, we don't like it. Let's go back here.
Wow, okay. And so that's your dad's side. And what
Mhm.
about your mom's side?
So my mom's side, her father is Ashkenazi, and his family is from Crimea, and her mother is has been in America the longest out of my whole family. They came in the 1870s and 1880s, and again, very shrouded in mystery. We've been here for 150 years, and over time, stories get told that maybe aren't true. Um, I was told that they were from Brazil and that they came to the US and, were Portuguese Jews that came to Brazil, whatever. And as far as I could tell from genealogical research, that's just like not true. Someone just made that up. I have some of the family came from Morocco, Tangier specifically. Some of them came from what was then Germany. They were the Portuguese Jews that were in the Baltic communities of Portuguese Jews. And some of them just kind of appeared out of nowhere. So, but that side it's when my grandparents got married, it was like considered a mixed marriage. And it was told maybe that a rabbi or two didn't want to officiate because they were like, we don't want to sanction this mixing.
Wow. So your family history is really a history of the Jewish diaspora.
I like to think so. I like to think so.
So it sounds like your ancestors were here long enough ago that you probably didn't even ever hear your ancestors speak another language besides English.
Yeah, well, my dad is a polyglot, and so in my house growing up, there was several languages running around. Obviously English and Hebrew because my dad wanted to be connected to his family, or he was also going to rabbinical school at that time, so talked a lot of Hebrew to us. Also Korean for some reason because my dad was a grad student in Korea. That's where he met my mom. A lot of Mexican Spanish because where we were living, and my dad grew up in LA, my mom grew up in New York, so obviously there's a lot of Spanish around. So it's a real diverse crowd there.
Wait, why were both of your parents in Korea?
So my dad, he was he was getting his master's in East Asian languages and studies, and was specifying in Korean, and so was studying at the Korea National University, the Korea Daehakyo. And my grandfather, my mom's dad, had gotten a Fulbright to teach American constitutional law at Korea Daehakyo. And at the time, in the early 90s in Korea, there was one synagogue, and that was on the Air Force Base. And so every Shabbat, it would just be a bunch of Air Force people and my grandparents and my dad. And eventually they were like, I have a daughter your age. You should meet. So,
Wow, that's a very international story. Okay, so you have some other languages in your family. What about you? What languages do you know?
besides English and Hebrew, I obviously speak Ladino, or I'm in the process of fully acquiring Ladino. It's always a process of gaining more knowledge from native speakers and gaining more knowledge from things you read. I also can kind of code switch into Spanish if I have enough energy. And I took Chinese in high school, and I'm currently learning French. So it's a real mixed bag as well.
Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Denver, Colorado, but I spent most of my childhood in Murrieta, California, which is in Temecula Valley, kind of wine country in Southern California.
And then how did you end up in Montreal for university?
I asked myself that question too. Uh, Truth be told, it's McGill has the name has a big weight in the Jewish community. And the second that my parents and my grandparents heard that I had gone into the Harvard of the North, I don't think I could have gone anywhere else.
Okay. And so what's your major there?
So I study linguistics and environment. Yeah.
And in your bio, it says that you are interested in First Nations languages. Have you done any research on those languages?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just finished my second year, so I'm still kind of finding my footing and everything. But I recently went to a conference for Ganyengeha, the like Mohawk language that was spoken here, and I think it's incredible because you hear about not only what's going on in the communities like here, the indigenous communities here, but there are people from like Wisconsin, across all of North America. I don't know why Wisconsin came to mind specifically, but Wisconsin, Oklahoma, California, that we're all sharing ideas about how the First Nation people of this continent can um, save their languages in the same way that, us as Jews are trying to save our languages. It's obviously different in several manners, but I think there's a lot of knowledge sharing that's very important.
Oh my gosh, totally. I think in a lot of the work that we do at the Jewish Language Project, we learn about ideas from Native American language revitalization, like the mentor learner program, for example, that we're hoping to launch officially. We did a pilot version of it a few years ago, is taken directly from Native American master apprentice programs.
Hmm.
And some of the research that I've done on Jewish languages has been picked up in Native American communities, and like the idea of ethno-linguistic infusion has been
Hmm.
useful for some of those communities, like thinking about the work that they're doing in a more realistic way. Like, yes, you want to revitalize it, you want to get more speakers, but most of the community members aren't going to make that commitment. And
Hmm.
so instead, having more realistic goals of fostering connection to the language by infusing it into the predominantly English environment, that's a more realistic approach.
Yeah. And it's very interesting that you brought that up because that was a big focus of some of the talks I went to.
At the Native American conference?
Yeah, at the
Oh, that's
conference.
great. That's great. Okay, so Ladino is not, I mean, maybe Ladino is one of your ancestral languages, but
Yes.
did you encounter any Ladino words when you were growing up?
So this is always a something that I talk about with my parents, or sometimes it's something that I talk about with my parents, where like I will use a word to a friend and they will just look at me, like stare at me blankly and be like, "What are you saying? Like, what did you just say?" Like, and most of the times when I came home and I asked my parents what the word was, it would be like Italian or Korean, and I'm like, "Why are we speaking Italian or Korean?" Um, but eventually, I there's certain words that make their way through just the sheer like fun of the word. And I was writing some of these down, and I think most of them actually originally come from Arabic, but they're filtered through like a phonological processes that I could assume is Ladino or Hebrew. Like Aiwa, Akhla. Wow, that's a very common Hebrew phrase, and Mihila. There's just a lot of words that you just like kind of use because there's no way to say that in English. No, nothing in English can approach the gravity that Iowa gives to the situation, you
Okay,
know?
so tell us what those words mean.
So Iowa is somewhere in between like yes and like oh brother and like great all right. um I can use it in a lot of situations that maybe I shouldn't use it in, but to me it's one of my favorite words. Akhla is it also means like great, and this one you mean like to me it's like a congratulations, like Akhla, like wow. Yeah, Michila, I don't know what it means at all actually, but we just say it whenever we do something very like Jewish or Israeli. You know, if we go to the store and we see like just terrible kosher cheese and we like look at it and we like Mechila.
Oh, interesting.
So
Okay, so those are basically Hebrew words,
yes.
and some of them from Arabic.
Mhm.
So, and when you said you grew up in your home speaking English and Hebrew, tell us how those languages mix together in your home.
Yeah, so my mom does not speak Hebrew, and so I would speak it with my father and sometimes with my brothers. And in general, what would happen is I would say the easy things in Hebrew and then switch to English when the words got too complicated. And so, in my house, I would like, if when I call my dad, I go like, Shabbat Shalom, Abba, Ma Shlomcha, Kol Beseder. Again, today I was like walking down the street and you know what I saw? I saw Misada Eze. It was crazy. It was like a Thai fusion with like Malay and you know. So it really I love the Hebrewish, and a lot of the Israeli American kids that I grew up around speak a very similar Hebrewish, and I I think there's beauty in like the mixed languages, like the incompleteness of all these identities mixing.
Absolutely. And but do you identify as an Israeli American kid?
Not super much anymore. At some point, I had been living in Israel for a few months, and my Hebrew was actually good, and I was getting very much into. I had like visited a lot of family there, and I had visited graves specifically. And you realize that the roots are so deep. There's like generations later that, you never knew your great grandfather who had this real culture. You still feel it in your bones, you still feel it in your blood that like it's there. But nowadays I don't generally say it because I feel like I'm very, very much American. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that being a person who family comes from a lot of different places.
So, would you consider your family to be a Hebraist family, or at least your dad to be a Hebraist?
Yes, not as much as maybe some others, but absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's not totally unheard of to have not grown up in Israel, but then speak Hebrew to your kids in America as a an ideological statement, as a way of
Mhm.
bringing Hebrew into the Jewish context in America.
Yeah. And I think it was great for me, like knowing this about myself and knowing this about my identity. But um I think why Ladino became such a big thing for me is that Hebrew in itself is a culture that, like the Israeli culture, I didn't really grow up with in a lot of senses. We ate some foods and we obviously celebrated like Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim, stuff like that. But uh it felt like the culture of a country over there instead of the culture that was like really in the home. Um, so I think that's why Ladino, and I could have gone for Yiddish, I could have gone for Ladino, I could have gone for Judeo-Arabic maybe, but Ladino to me was because I grew up around a lot of Mexican people, Hispanic people, it kind of reminded me the most of myself. It like looked more like a mirror than Yiddish did. It looked more like a mirror than Judeo-Arabic. So it became very important in my life, much more than maybe I should have, knowing that I didn't grow up with it.
Well, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, how did you get interested in Ladino at first?
It was around the time of my bar mitzvah where I was doing all this bar mitzvah training and talking to people. And the synagogue that I was going to at the time is a conservative synagogue in Denver, Colorado. And in the conservative movement, there's a tendency to do this version of En Eloheinu in Ladino. Uh, and I remember like, you know, basically my bar mitzvah tutor asked me, do you want to do the En Eloheinu in Ladino? And I was like, what's Ladino? And that kind of started me, looking at that. And I was like, wait a second, why is this so familiar? Why does this like speak to me on a level that I don't know if it should? But I hadn't really heard of Ladino very much before that point. I knew my family was Sephardi, but that could mean a lot of different things. And uh, my mom's family being so proud of how Portuguese they were specifically was, even though none of them spoke Portuguese except for my great uncle, uh, it didn't really occur to me that like Ladino was there.
And you said you had family from Bulgaria, but you didn't have contact with them directly?
Yeah, they came to Haifa in the 1840s. So the descendants of that family, they do still live in Israel. I had like through a genealogy website, I actually like have talked to a few of them, and it is fun how, very different our lives are, but uh really the like because it was just so distant and it came through so many layers of migration, like you know, to my dad, the biggest move of his life was when, he grew up in Brooklyn and his parents decided to move across the country to LA. That was the big shock. So, if that's a big shock to him and then to my grandpa and then, up the family tree, the details kind of get lost and the languages get lost.
Yeah. So did you end up doing In Kelohenu at your bar mitzvah?
I did end up doing it, and I had a friend come up to me and be like, "That's really funky Spanish, man. That's weird."
And what did he mean by that? What was funky about it now that you know Ladino?
Yeah, there's in the text it says non like non como nuestro señor, and the non I think threw him off, and the muestro threw him off. I don't know where the non comes from. I don't know if that's like an older version, but uh, muestro obviously is ours, and in standard Spanish it's nuestro with an ñ or n, sorry, not ñ, and so. There's little things like that, you know. Señor being spelled with an NY instead of with the N with a tilde on it. A little funk there.
And so, when your friend said that, did that start you on a journey of curiosity?
Yeah, maybe it took a couple extra days for the bar mitzvah cake to wear off, but yeah, I think eventually. Uh,
Okay, so then how did you learn Ladino?
Originally, I found like a vocabulary list online, and I just like it was COVID right after my bar mitzvah, and I would like basically be playing Minecraft with my friends, and then everyone goes to sleep. I jump on, I learn some Ladino vocabulary. And eventually I got to a point where I started like speaking Spanish with my friends. And then I started getting curious about like, okay, I don't want to just learn the words. I want to learn like really the language. And so uh, I got a little textbook. I started watching like Ladino lesson videos that the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood has used. It's fun. My dad started attending a class by Brian Kirshen about Ladino. Like he took like Ladino 101 with Brian Kirshen, and then he would like filter that information down to me. Um, so eventually I got to the point where I could participate in like the Ladino salons and uh the Ladino Comunidad. So there's like a chat group, Ladino Comunidad, and Ladino salons are a weekly Zoom meeting that native speakers and learners all come together and speak to each other and share information. Um, and so, it's always a process. When I don't have a lot of time because of school, it can fall behind, but it's always a process of learning and growing with the language.
So you're mostly self-taught with some classes that you took online or that you took vicariously through your dad.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I think that is one of the biggest struggles that we have now in Ladino is there are a lot of resources. They just aren't as coherent and cohesive as they need to be for people to have like easy access to the language.
Hmm. And so what do you think can be done differently to make it more accessible?
I ask myself that a lot. I've originally I wanted to write textbooks and like curriculum material, but then who would teach the curriculum material? There aren't a lot of speakers alive to do that, and am I even the best one to do that? Probably not. Absolutely not. Actually, I don't. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. And so I think what has to happen is that we, as Latineros, like examine our relationship to the language and how we want it to pass on because it right now it's in a state of there's a lot of growing interest, but the interest is not being directed anywhere specifically. And so I think what we can do is decide what we want to do as Latineros and decide what we want to do for the future to make sure that the language continues in the way that we want it to, you know?
Okay, so how is that? How do you want it to continue?
It might be a little controversial, but I think maybe the best way that we can do this is treat Ladino like our variety of Spanish, nuestro español, and have it be where in the United States, where a lot of people descended from Ladino speakers are, uh, Spanish is a second language, I know that very well, and I know that a lot of people know that very well. And so if we can treat it like, okay, we want our kids to have knowledge of nuestro español, but also be able to use it in their life, I think it could convince a lot more people that it's an important project. If their kids can have a leg up in life, but also be keeping our traditions and our language. Um, I know that's very controversial for a lot of people because there's a lot of movement to say, you know, this is not nuestro español, this is Ladino, this is our, our language, period. Spanish is over there, Ladino here, you know. But yeah.
That's right. In fact, when I was in college, I had a phone conversation with a scholar of Jewish languages, and he asked what languages I know, and I said, "Well, I know Hebrew and Yiddish, and I've taken some Spanish so I can understand some Ladino." And he said, "Wait, stop right there. Ladino and Spanish are different languages." And he gave me some examples of, I think ropa means this in in Spanish and
Yeah.
this in Ladino. And so that's when I first encountered the ideology of distinctive languages. But I think I'm with you. I agree. It is definitely controversial, but I think it is a variety of Spanish. You know, it's Judeo-Spanish, just like other Jewish languages are varieties of their original or current co-territorial non-Jewish language, right? Um, and it is important for us to analyze it in that way, but it's also important to talk about the distinctiveness of it.
Yeah. So, that's how I can see it living healthy for many generations to come. If it becomes a community language of ours that is not necessarily taught to be its own language, but our Spanish.
A community language meaning that it's transmitted intergenerationally within a community.
I can imagine it like the teaching and function of the language happens through my first thought was like Jewish day schools, which are a very strong I don't want to say bastion, but kind of uh education tool for young Jews, but through synagogues, like in addition to Hebrew school, maybe you have Ladino school on some days. That is something that needs to happen with like a lot of mobilization and a lot of people everywhere. And so it's a process, and I think it's a process that if enough people can agree on it, it could happen.
It would take a lot of work and a lot of funding, but I think it is possible. So you used the term Ladineros. Tell us about that.
Latinos, it's originally, I mean, it's just a construction in Ladino where you take the occupational or like ideological person form ero and you add it to Ladino. And I've heard it in the context of specifically like this Facebook group that exists. It's a Facebook group that people post in Ladino or post about Ladino. It's called Los Ladineros. But I've also heard it as part of the language of the people who, you know, want Ladino to continue. The people who, yeah, it's the equivalent like Yiddishist or Hebraist. Uh,
And so you consider yourself a Ladinero?
I think that would be apt of a terminology.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There's also a group in Seattle called Los Ladineros, or now
Huevos.
Los Nuevos Ladineros. And so, yeah, it's definitely a term that's used in the community. And it's interesting because you used it within English.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, are there other words like that that are common in the Ladino activist world when you're not speaking Ladino, but when you're speaking English or another language?
That is a good question. I wish I talked to more Ladino activists in English. Uh,
Or not? I mean, it's probably good that you're talking to them in Ladino.
yeah, yeah. But I think there's to me what's most pertinent is like the language around a synagogue. And this is also what I used with my parents. The words like kal for some people or snoga for others. Um, Also words like, well, Chacham is Hebrew, but I think there's a tendency in the US to use the word rabbi. And so to me, Chacham is like a signifier of the Sephardi, right? Words like that, I think there's a fair amount of synagogue related words, which also happen to be Hebrew sometimes that you use to signify that you are Sephardi or that you are a Ladino speaker, more specifically. Um,
What are some other ones?
what's coming to mind is like Khazan, um, and oh, well, Maldado is not necessarily a synagogue word, but it is the word for like a death anniversary, a Yortzeit in Yiddish. Um, this is I should have sat down and wrote some of these down, but uh, yeah, there are a fair amount that
Okay, well,
I'm
if you think
blanking
of
on.
others, let us know. Let's talk a little bit more about Meldado. So you would, how would you use that in a sentence?
Well, recently it was my great grandmother's Meldado, and so I called my great aunt and I wished her, good with like feelings, and I hope everything was good because I know at this point it's been I believe it's the fifth year of Meldado, and it's that at that point it becomes a little more fossilized. I don't know. So, you know, it's a event. You use it as a noun. You say today is this person's meldado. Um, we remembered this meldado yesterday. Words like that.
In the Seattle Sephardic community, they use that word not just to mean the anniversary of the death, but also a study session in memory of the person.
Mm,
Like they went to call for the Meldado.
that's very interesting.
And okay, so then do you use words like that, like kal or esnoga or chacham, when you're talking to your parents about an Ashkenazi congregation?
I will say Esnoga, mostly because I do think it's a little funny, the way that it sounds. Esnoga. And I do call my daddy, we talk about how much of a hacham he is. Every time he shaves up, he goes, Baba, how you gonna look like a hacham? You know, you have to have the big beard. Iowa.
Wait, you call him Baba?
I do call him Baba, yes.
How did that come about?
It's fun. I think each one of my siblings has a different word for each one of my parents. So my oldest brother calls him Baba. My middle brother calls him Pops, and then I used to call him Abba, but I think I've started calling him Baba just because it really rolls off the tongue.
What language is that from?
Baba, I believe I always thought of it as being like Arabic or Turkish. I know that a lot of my friends who are Arabic speaking or Turkish speaking will use that word, but it has come to my attention recently that it's also very much like Persian, and I did grow up around a lot of Persian people, so that could be where we picked it up as a family.
Oh, when you were in California?
Also in Denver, there's a surprising
Denver.
amount of Persian Jews in Denver.
Hmm. Wow. So you really have a lot of infusion in your family's English of many other languages. You mentioned near the beginning some Korean and Italian words. Can you tell us some of those?
So a very classic word that my dad uses, or my parents use, is kibun. Kibun is, I believe it's the like stomach chakra in Korean Buddhism, but it also just means like your spine, I guess, or your uh, like more readily like your overall like well-being. And so, if I was like fighting with my brother, my mom would be like, "You're hurting my kibun, stop it," you know. So that's a Korean word. A lot of the words that come into mind is when my parents would scold me. So, uh, agita, is Italian like acid, and it'd be like, "Stop fighting, you give me agita."
Well, I
Uh,
think that is a loan word from Italian that's used in English more
yes,
broadly.
yeah.
What else? What other words in your family that were unusual in that way?
I always make the joke that the only thing I know how to say in Korean is your disappointment. Is 당신은 실망입니다. It tends to get a good laugh out of people, but it's really just because I asked my dad how to say it, and that's the only thing I remembered.
So they didn't actually say that to you when you were younger.
Maybe once or twice.
Oh no, because you were never a disappointment.
No, no, of course not. Of course not.
Um,
Um,
well, okay, what are some other words that are part of your familect?
Familect. I guess I'm on a Korean roll. You say yabo means like wife or like honey. So my dad will say like yabo 갑시다, like let's go. Kaja, like even more, let's go. We had a cat that had a various number of names. I think this is shows a linguistic diversity. We called him in English, we called him Drakey because when we adopted him, his name was Draco. We also called him Mandu Dewang, which means like dumpling the great, especially in Korean. And so, every time I'd pass him, I'd take a deep bow and say, 안녕하십니까, 만두 대왕입니다. Like very, very formal way to say like greetings, mandu. My other cat we call Habibi, which is obviously Hebrew Arabic, and we shorten it Bibi, which is Persian actually for like queen of the house. It's funny because it's semantic, like phonosemantic with like balabus. Bibi is similar to like balabus. I don't know, in some way, man.
Wow, very cool. And so what's the actual name of your cats?
Um, that's a good question. I didn't know if they have a legal name or something, but it's kind of whatever we're feeling in the moment.
Wow, I love how your multilingual household extends to your pets.
We
And have
try
you
our
had any other
best.
pets? What's that?
Oh, we try our best.
And have you had any other pets besides those two cats?
Yeah, so we had two birds that were the Los Pajaricos, which is Ladino for like the little birdies. They had individual names, but those were from like cartoon shows because I was a kid. We also had a lizard named Sergey. That's not important. That was my brother's. And
Wow.
a
And
couple of
wait,
fish. We was a zoo really at some point.
so Los Pajaricos, who called them that? You?
That was, yeah. What happened is when I got them, my dad would not refer to them by name because he was kind of mad that I got birds. So he just called them like the birds. And I would like, oh, los pájaros. And then eventually it was like los pajaricos. And then that's how my dad started calling it. That's how my mom started calling it. And eventually that just became their name.
Wow. And wait, how old were you when you got the birds?
It was during COVID, so not as young as maybe someone who could only name after cartoon characters should be. But
So,
yeah.
but it was after your bar mitzvah, after you had
Yes, it
started to
was.
learn some Ladino and
Hmm.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
what else? What other Yiddish, Ladino, or other words were there in your home? Any other words from your ancestral languages?
Um, well, there was a little Greek in there, so I don't know if that came from Ladino or not. I bet it didn't because my mom and her family grew up in around a lot of Greek people. We like call my grandmother, who is not Greek, we call her Yaya, which is Greek for grandmother. Um, it's fun. Each of my grandparents has a different name that we call them, like in each different language, because that's how crazy my family is. I don't know.
Okay, what are they?
We have Saba, Nonna, uh, Zaidi, and Yaya.
So
So
Nona, would you consider that to be Italian or Ladino or something else?
I would consider that Italian because I don't think, well, she's Ashkenazi, and as well, I don't think she knows anything except for Italian. Like she seems very classy. Like Italian was very classy growing up. So, she wanted to be she only makes like Italian food and it's like, oh yeah, call me nonna. And like she grew up in an Italian neighborhood or whatever.
Wow. Okay. So for the language mixing in your home isn't really because of ancestral languages. It's because of languages that they were exposed to either by interacting with people in the neighborhood or through their studies abroad or just through their knowledge of other languages.
Yeah, I think this is what has made me so enamored with language enough to study it and try to dedicate my life to it, is that it is the ultimate signifier of like personhood and identity in a way that not a lot of other things can be. Um, it is like always evolving and always changing. And what I say one week will sound completely different than what I say another week, even if I'm trying to express the same idea of well. Um, and I think because of the amount of migration that happens and everything, people seek out culture. They absorb the cultures that are around them and they bring it with them. I think this is the story of my family, and this is obviously the story of like Ladino and Yiddish. Ladino has Greek and Italian and French and Arabic and Turkish because people went to all these places and they heard these words and they took them into the language with them. And I think in my own way, with my messed up linguistic family, I'm continuing that tradition.
Absolutely. With your, let's call it Jewish English, but very international Jewish English.
Yes. I I saw your lecture when I was younger about Jewish English and about the Yiddish words that you use in English, and I think that that also very much helped me realize where I was, and realize that I'm steeped in the language of, I espouse the language of Jews, even if I at that point only spoke like English and Hebrew. I was speaking Yiddish, I was speaking whatever I could put out there.
Mm,
Thank you for that.
I love that. And I love how you made use of online resources to learn languages and learn about language.
I'll try my best.
So let's talk about Mersi Muncho. How did you come to create it?
We only waited. Oh, it took a while to get here. Wow. Yeah. So I had been learning Ladino for a couple years, and I had gotten increasingly a little depressed about the future. I felt like I arrived at the party a little too late, where it's been 2 or 3 generations at least since the last ancestors I had that spoke Ladino, and so I you know I was a little down on myself, a little depressed, and I saw a ad for a scholarship, actually an Instagram ad for a scholarship. Basically, language revitalization. If you want to help your language, we'll give you some money to do it. And I applied, and somehow they thought that my idea of like cooking was a really good idea, and they were like, "Oh, well, let's give these guys some money." And I'm really glad that it happened because it's changed my life in a lot of different ways, and I'm very grateful that I can be in a position to do this for my community and do this for my language and connect so readily and so strongly to other people around the globe and do what I can, as well to help my language survive, you know.
So that fellowship was with WikiTongues.
Yes.
And were there other people in the cohort that you interacted with?
It was a little confusing the the way that it was set up. I think I exchanged messages with like a handful of people, but uh, the division of how it wasn't done very well. So I really only talked to the people who like directly gave me the money. But soon, actually in August, not August, sorry, October, slip of the tongue, I'm going to a WikiTongues conference in Ghana to do that, talk to all these other people working on their language revitalization and language diversity. And, I'm glad that I can do that. It's like another opportunity to share with each other, all this very important techniques.
Oh, that's great. Where is it?
It's in Accra in Ghana.
Wow. And they pay for you to go?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I received a scholarship. Um,
Wow, what a
so
great experience, great opportunity. So when you submitted that application, how did you come up with the idea of doing cooking videos in Ladino?
so I love food, if you can't tell. And I think besides language, food is one thing that um, is so important for a culture to survive. I always think, I have the names of my ancestors. I have a last name that has been passed down generation and generation, and it's changed a little bit, but you know, it's stretches back. I have first names, whatever. I may have, you know, I may look like my great grandparents or their great grandparents, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, life is very complicated, and what it means to be a person is a lot more about what we see, what we taste, what we hear, what it sounds like to be around a dinner table with your family is very important to me, and what it like tastes like to be around a dinner table with your family. And I think it's very special to me every time that I tasted something that I could imagine people hundreds of years ago tasting, the same people in the same place, not the same place, same people, very different place, very different time, and we're both biting down on something delicious. So in 100 years, will our kids, whatever, have our names? Probably. Will they look like us? Maybe. But will they taste the things that we taste? Will they like feel the sun the way that we feel the sun and hear the sounds of our family arguing in seven different languages over, who can eat the last chicken nugget because one of them is very picky and so we can only eat chicken nuggets for 7 years. Sorry.
Was that a personal experience?
Maybe personal experience. I'm gonna call my brother after this.
Okay, okay.
Sorry.
Um, so cooking videos are a way of keeping your culture alive, but the things you cook, are those things that you grew up with in your home?
Many of them aren't, uh, and I have realized that it's a difficult balance to reach where I knowing the diversity of my family, whether from the ancestors or just from experience, I grew up with probably more Korean and Persian food than anything else. Besides Shabbat, most of our meals were like kind of whatever. I'm very grateful that obviously my parents cooked for me for a lot of my childhood, but it's at the same time, I'm not gonna make a recipe video about like bulgogi in Ladino. Um, I find it part of reconnecting to my roots because no matter what is lost, it can be gained back. And sometimes I do try to do things that are more specific to my family. Like I made a video about nazuk. Nazuk is actually like an Armenian pastry that somehow ended up being eaten by my family at most holidays. So it's a balance to strike where, part of it is my own personal journey of discovery, and part of it is sharing my family's traditions, whatever's left of them, to the world.
Mm. Well, it sounds like your family is really a sponge, both linguistically and culinarily.
Oh God, you have no idea.
What are some other dishes that you have cooked on Mersi Muncho?
Well, have made kafta, which is another one of my family's uh, favorite Shabbat meals, and I think that was one of the funnier videos to make because it is a very easy recipe, so I kind of had to stretch the length out.
What
Um,
what is it? What is kofta?
Kafta is essentially a ground beef mixed with onions and parsley and cilantro and spices, formed into kind of a torpedo shape and then grilled or fried. Um, we also make kube, which I might make that into a video. I have cooked a few things that I just hadn't really known about before doing research for these videos. There's a recipe I did for Tisha B'Av, or sorry, not Tisha B'Av, Tu B'Shvat. Sorry, very different. Tu B'Shvat called ashore or trigo cocho, which is like a wheat pudding that I had not really heard about, but had come to my attention when I was visiting people for Tu B'Shvat. Yeah.
So both in the language and the food, you're not just keeping traditions from your family alive, you're bringing new traditions to light and new traditions that aren't really connected to your family.
Yeah. In some ways, it feels that I am going back in time and, reaching before Kraft mac and cheese. But in other ways, it is more of a community thing where I have a role to play as a someone who makes videos for the cuisine of a community that maybe I don't share all the dishes with. And so maybe I'm incorporating them into my own story as well as taking some of my own story and putting it out there.
Hmm. What other thoughts do you have about your mixed ancestry and language and culture.
Yeah, so we find ourselves here basically at a time where a lot of languages are dying, and this is the last generation that might have access to native speakers. Um, and I want to be able to have my kids, Baruch Hashem, Bizrat Hashem, sorry, have the ability to uh, reach back and know what their ancestors were talking about and cooking and all that. And to me, it's kind of a warning story of not necessarily letting go of these traditions so easily. Um, I'm very grateful that I grew up in such a diverse household, but at the same time, I also wish maybe less Italian was spoken in my house and more Ladino. What can you do? Uh,
So do you think you'll speak Ladino to your children someday?
I really hope so. I hope that in the future there are more people like me who are willing to teach their kids Ladino or Yiddish or Hakatiya or keep their traditions alive for generations to come. No matter if the kids are fluent or not, I think it's very important that they, as I said, know what it was like to sit at the dinner table and argue with the family and hear the same arguments over and over again.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to end by asking about your name. So,
Mhm.
Benny Ginsberg-Margo, tell us about that.
So my full name is Benjamin. I'm named after my step great grandfather. Who is very important to my mother. And that is in the Ashkenazi tradition of naming after a dead relative. I also have a middle name, David or David, which is named after a cousin of my dad. And I think it's just because I'm the youngest, I got kind of the boot. I didn't get the fun ancestor names. I got the random cousin. But I'm grateful nonetheless. He seemed like a cool guy. Uh, my last name, Ginsberg-Margo. Ginsberg comes from my mom's father whose family came from Crimea, Simferopol. It's a very common Ashkenazi name, obviously, and a lot of people, because my mom worked in law for a long time, always asked her, are you related to Ruth Bader?
Yeah. Well, Ginsburg is actually one of the older Ashkenazi names that comes from a geographic area in early Ashkenazi settlement.
Yeah,
So it shows your longtime Ashkenazi roots in that sense. And then what about Margot?
yeah. So Margot is a shortening of Margolith. Margolith is I believe it's the Mizrahi Hebrew pronunciation of Margalit, which is Hebrew for pearl. Um, and so that was my grandfather changed his name. My grandfather, he was somewhat of a doo-wop star in the 50s and 60s. So if you have ever heard the song like "In the Jungle, the Mighty Jungle," that was his
Yeah.
band. Um,
Wait, that was by your grandfather?
yes, yes,
What was his name?
Philip Margo.
Wow.
So
Yichis, as we say. That's like, good descent. Okay.
So it's a little fun fact I like to throw around, but it is, that was the family name back as far as we can tell. And it's interesting because it is like purely Hebrew, which is, as far as I'm concerned, like a little unusual among Sephardi Jews or Sephardi Jews that have that name specifically, because most Jews that I know that have like a derivative of that, like Margulis or Margolis or something like that, is they're Ashkenazi. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a very interesting little thing.
Well, it could have also reflected earlier migrations within your family, maybe
Mhm.
from Ashkenaz to where was that grandfather from? That particular grandfather?
Brooklyn.
Oh, Brooklyn. Okay, right. So eventually ending up in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Benjamin Ginsberg Margot, thank you so much for all that you're doing to keep Ladino alive and to raise awareness about your family's mixed ancestry, multi-language contact. and all the wonderful food videos that you put out into the world.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope it was insightful in some way.
Absolutely. Heritage Words is a partnership of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Language Project and HUC Connect, supported by tax-deductible donations from listeners like you. I'm the producer and host, Sarah Bunin Benor. Kyle Elbaz Fingerhut is assistant producer, Avishay Artsy is editor, and Talia Ehrenberg is video editor. The music is from Maurice El Medioni's French and Algerian Arabic album Café Oran, featuring the klezmatics David Krakauer and Frank London, courtesy of Piranha Records. This podcast is one of the many ways the Jewish Language Project raises awareness about the diversity of the Jewish people and the phenomenon of heritage words. We also have online crowdsourced dictionaries where you can find the words mentioned in each episode. Our social media posts include Music Mondays, Jewish Word of the Week, and Fun Facts. And we offer free educational materials and exhibits that you can visit online or display in a synagogue, museum, or community center. Contact us about our live tapings, study tours, and sponsorship opportunities. Looking for gifts for Shabbat dinners and Passover seders? Check out our whimsical and educational t-shirts, tote bags, posters, stickers, and aprons. You can find all this content and donate, volunteer, or sign up for our email list at jewishlanguages.org. Thank you, Mersi Muncho, Ilaha Yaviloch, Ashenem Dank, Shukran, Soch Boshi, Toda Rabah.